Hello, my dear hellspawn on the other side of the screen.
Welcome to the next part of our top 10 people whom I respect most and who have shaped me decisively. Today's installment is about a fighter for free speech, about a real feminist, about a great woman who should be a role model for all women and girls.
Number 4. Ayaan Hirsi-Ali.
She is the first and only woman on this list, and also the only black woman. Anyone who now believes I have only included her as an alibi in order not only to have dead, old and middle-aged white men in the list makes a big mistake. Because I would have made the list completely without women if there had been none that deserved my respect and therefore a spot on this list. In contrast to the brain-dead social justice warriors, I do not rate people for skin color, gender or other characteristics for which they are not responsible, but solely according to their actions and thinking, their values and achievements. And in this respect, Ayaan justly stands near the top. I became aware of Ayaan Hirsi-Ali the same way I did with Sam Harris, through Bill Maher's political talk show.
And you're a critic of Islam, and for that, so many... Well, your book's called Heretic, so, you know, I don't think I'm talking out of school here. And the other one was called Infidel, so, you know, I think you're doing it to yourself. And we're glad you are. But why is it that so many liberals, liberals who absolutely hate blaming the victim, as they should, as we all should, when it comes to rape cases and so forth, how dare you blame the victim? So many blame you. They turn the finger on you. You're the bad guy. How is that happening?
I think some of them are scared. I think some of them are protective of the people who present to them as I am the victim. You know, so many of the so-called spokespeople for Muslims emphasize the victimhood of all Muslims, people they don't really speak for, and they say, look at her, she's the awful one, she's the one who's asking questions, she's the heretic, she's the infidel.
A year ago, Bill Maher would have been on this list himself, but since he jumped from Bernie to Hillary and has now completely jumped on the anti-Trump train, he has lost my respect totally.
New rule, Donald Trump must immediately submit to DNA test to determine whether he is in fact the love child of a human woman and an orangutan from the Brooklyn Zoo. Look, Donald, I'm not saying that your mother was repeatedly fucking an orangutan back in the 1940s. I don't know if that's true. I hope it's not true. But given your face, your physique, your intelligence level, and of course your hair, the American people deserve some real proof that your mother did not spend most nights in 1945 covering her body in banana oil, sneaking into the monkey cage, and compulsively humping an orange-haired ape. Somebody had to say that.
You can find more about that in my video about the US election. But back to Ayaan. Bill Maher's interview with her has impressed me so much that I have immediately bought her autobiography Infidel. She also reads the audiobook herself. Her life story is an adventure, and I do not mean that in a positive, entertaining sense. If I would only mention all the milestones of her life here, it would go beyond the scope of this top 10. So I'll make this short. Buy her book if you want to know more. From early childhood on in Somalia, she suffered from the disease Islam. Islam mutilated her genitals, Islam broke her skull, Islam took her freedom, Islam killed her friends. And she nevertheless managed to expel Islam from her body and mind and become an educated, highly intelligent, successful politician and activist. Although it was not only Islam, but also supposedly secular Europeans who put obstacles in her way in order not to annoy the Muslims. This is the really scandalous part of her life story. Islam is garbage, and that as a woman she had to suffer under Islamic auspices is sad, but not surprising. That the West, in this case the Netherlands, rather legitimized and pampered radical Islam instead of standing unwavering on her side is the real scandal here. Her film, Submission 1, which describes the oppression of women in Islam, should have been shown in an endless loop on all Western TV stations since the barbarians killed director Theo van Gogh to show these Neanderthals that the West will not be intimidated by their brutal violence and murder. But no, the film was never shown again. Instead, while she became a successful politician in the Netherlands in the meantime, she was to be thrown out of the Netherlands a few years later for purely political reasons. Just this political farce, which even forced the Dutch government to resign and the Queen to intervene, is worth a separate book. I would really be interested what my favorite Dutch person Griffiths has to say about this, but I almost believe that she was still too young to be aware of it. Luckily, Ayaan Hirsi-Ali was able to immigrate to the United States, which gladly took her. And with Denmark, at least one EU country also showed solidarity with Ayaan and would have taken her in. With her life story as a woman who is able to resist all obstacles in a real patriarchic society, she should be the idol of feminism. But she is not. On the contrary, feminists despise her. And why? Because she is against Islam. You can't make this stuff up. If somebody had told me a few years ago, hey ThinkingDevil, in the near future, women's rights advocates and the most misogynistic ideology of the world will stand side by side, I would have laughed at that person because of his abstruse utterance. But it's true. Real feminists like Hirsi-Ali and Christina Hoff Sommers are despised by today's wannabe feminists. Instead, they wear stupid pussy hats, follow a Muslim woman who is openly pro-Sharia and pro-Hamas, and a convicted murderer and torturer, as happened at the Women's March on Washington. They want to blow up the White House and compare a moderate, not really Republican president with Adolf Hitler.
Fucking idiots.
This only confirms once more that Islam and third-wave feminism have many common goals. Terminating censoring the opposition at any cost. Taking key positions in politics and the media. Totalitarian control over the thoughts, words, art and deeds of citizens. But this is also a topic for another video. Back to Ayaan. Despite the fact that her real allies abandoned her or even betrayed her, she continues to fight against the oppression of women in Islam, making her not only an exceptionally respect-worthy woman, but a real feminist in my eyes. And anyone who does not perceive the world through their ideological blinders, but perceives reality as it is, should see this in the same way. The fact that she is also an advocate for freedom of speech and expression is self-evident. I wish all feminists were like Ayaan Hirsi-Ali. Then, feminism in the West would still have a right to exist. She, at least, is concerned with existing humanitarian problems and not with bullshit such as the non-existing gender pay gap, manspreading or mansplaining. Real equality is even so important for her that she is concerned about the subject of circumcision. A truly barbaric tradition, which is more accurately described as genital mutilation. Ayaan not only is against the circumcision of girls and women, but also, of course, against the circumcision of boys and men. It is a scandal anyway that circumcision in supposedly civilized Western countries has not been forbidden for eternities. Because this is nothing else than child abuse, and child abuse of the most evil kind. A defenseless baby who can neither agree with the intervention nor at all conceive what is happening with him or her being completely mutilated without any reason whatsoever can hardly be surpassed in inhumanity and barbarism. And no, your stupid fairy tales that dictate this are not a legitimate reason. Representatives of the species Homo sapiens who advocate or practice this are among the most despicable creatures on the planet, who not only deserve no respect, but also have forfeit their right to be called humans. One of the decisive characteristics of human beings is their ability to empathy, which in the case of circumcision is obviously overshadowed by morose religious dogmas. This is the only explanation for the fact that sexual abuse of children and other forms of child abuse are regarded as the most disgusting crimes, and the perpetrators of which are rightfully perceived as the scum of the earth, while at the same time an overwhelming majority of the population doesn't even blink an eye at this form of child abuse. I despise you, and I will, like Ayaan Hirsi-Ali, gladly take your mendacious and longly based pseudo-arguments apart and reveal you as the very empathy-less barbarians you are. But for the moment, I will only quote Christopher Hitchens, who says it best. In the area of immoral customs, there is hardly anything as bizarre as the genital mutilation in children. It is also particularly difficult to reconcile with the teleological proof of God. It is to be assumed that a shaping God would pay particular attention to the reproductive organs of his creatures, as they are essential to the species' continued existence. Since the beginning of time, however, children have been dragged out of the cradle in the course of religious rituals, and they have been treated with sharp stones or knives in the crotch area. Here is a section from a debate, in which Hitchens slaps a rabbi about the subject.
There are things that a morally normal, even a very morally average or mediocre person would not, unprompted, do. For example, hold down their daughter at the age of 6, tear off her underwear, and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone. They wouldn't do that if they didn't think God was telling them to do it. Or the mullahs, or if it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do. One of the reasons why I have the lurid subtitle I do of my book, Religion is a Poison, is that it makes ordinary moral people, compels them, forces them, in some cases orders them, to do disgusting, wicked, unforgivable things. There's no expiation for the generations of misery and suffering that religion has inflicted in this way and continues to inflict, and I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
Rabbi, you want to give us something?
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically...
You weren't doing it right then.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humor in that way, or flippancy in that way. Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive a male child as far as possible of the opportunity of that. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States of boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice.
I have linked the source. Please look at the whole video. The rabbi is revealed as the sadistic barbarian he is. And because mentally challenged morons are prone to put circumcision opponents like me, Hitchens and Hirsi-Ali into the anti-Semite corner, half of the people in this top 10 who have shaped me the most and whom I respect the most are of Jewish descent.
So kiss my ass, bitches and bastards.
But these apologists aren't interested in facts anyway. They have recently described Ayaan as a white supremacist after she had to cancel her reading tour in Australia due to security concerns because of their brain-dead protests. So much stupidity and denial of reality is incredible. So, after I have almost reached the level of annoyance and swearing of die vulgäre Analyse, I need to calm down again. The following clip will help me with this, in which Ayaan gets a question from Christopher Hitchens, who was in the audience during the Q&A session of her lecture. The friendly banter between these two people always makes me smile.
Is this working? My name is Christopher Hitchens. I work for Vanity Fair, which is a small faith-based magazine in New York City. Believes in storytelling. My question, I think, is just permissible within the brackets of your book and also your talk, because you're very interesting about what happened in Somalia and to Somalis during your time there. And we've recently seen the vanquishment of the so-called Islamic courts movement in Somalia, but by people who you describe as the most hated among Somalis, namely the Ethiopians. So I would be terribly interested to hear, and I'm sure I'm not alone, what you hear from Somali friends and what you think yourself about whether an Ethiopian intervention is too high a price to pay for saving Somalia from the Islamic courts.
And you, being a white, middle-aged male, must already know the answer.
Lush of you. Though I feel rather rejuvenated when you've said it. Taking the veil off can inflame men. I'm just telling you that now. Someone tell you.
I think you already know the answer. Look, honestly, Somalia has been a construct since 1960, when the Italians, the French, and the British left. In the case of Djibouti was a French colony, the rest was Italian and British, and they left. And they left behind what they call an interim government that lasted just a few years, about 9 years before a dictatorship had overtaken it. After this dictatorship, which started in 1969 and lasted until 1990, then anarchy came on. And the only reason that the United States is interested in what's going on in Somalia today is because it might be a threat to the interest of the United States. In Somalia, being an anarchy, a place with no government, where people of all deviant behavior can group and regroup, the United States, having had the experience with Afghanistan and the Taliban, want to prevent, and particularly the Bush administration wants to prevent that such islands of terrorism can arise. Now, there are two ways of going about it. One way is, let's ignore this place, let them sort out their business, and we'll see what they make of it. If they want to go through centuries of medieval treatment and they want to go back with the Islamic courts to the 7th century, fine. I don't really think that many Americans care beyond caring in the moral sense. Like, people would say it's terrible what's happening there, but they would never put policy and money and American lives to go out there and do it. One, and I would say in the international, in theory on international relations, one of them that is emerging, and I think what we still see as people being called the neoconservatives, is if America interferes at all, then it should not only be about the American interest. You can put a moral, a moral mortgage on things by saying, look, we are going to improve things. We are not going to leave Afghanistan without a government. We are going to put in a government there to prevent, we're going to bring in democracy, we're going to prevent Al-Qaeda-like and other terrorists from making their home. That's not what is happening in Somalia today. What is happening in Somalia today is we see people reverting back to the old theory of having a neighboring country or a force within the place, within Somalia, and trying to remove the bad guys. So America will finance them and will help them and so on, and then hopefully waiting until the problem solves itself. Now, we've seen that in many countries that hasn't worked. And I don't think it's going to work at all. And it's not about Somalis and Ethiopians hating each other. It's about Ethiopia being a dictatorship, Ethiopia being bad for its own people, and Ethiopia will maybe send the troops under pressure from the United States for now, but that is never going to be long-lasting. And the Somali, well, what? The alternative, they call themselves the secular movement, who want to oust the Islamic courts. They are not dedicated to the American interest of establishing a democracy and establishing the rule of law and so on and so forth. They just want to take the money for a while, use it, and then see what happens next. This is a place where we live by the day. We don't have long future plans on building democracies and so on and so forth. So I'm sorry to disappoint all of you. The new, reverting back to the old policy of helping the bad guy to serve the interests of the United States is not going to help. It's only going to postpone a problem and make it bigger.
These were the numbers 10 through 4. However, before we get to the top 3, I would like to award an all-time respect to someone, as well as mention a few additional names, which almost were included in this list, and also mention a few people who I do not respect at all, and probably never will. Stay tuned for that, and if you don't want to miss it, subscribe.
To be continued. Count on it.